Welcome back to the Soul Inspiring Business Podcast, the space where strategy meets soul and transformation begins with a single spark. Now, today I'm joined by Carol Shen, founder of Start Culture Shift. And her roots are in industrial organizational psychology, but her heart is in human centered leadership. And Carol brings us a grounded yet visionary path for something that most businesses crave, but few actually cultivate, and that's culture. She'll be sharing her culture roadmap, a practical step-by-step framework for helping leaders transform culture from abstract ideals into tangible actions. And in this episode, you'll learn how to define culture through action, not belief, why small businesses can create cultural change faster than you think, how feedback, when reframed, becomes a powerful tool for building trust, and really so much more. So whether you're leading a small team or scaling your impact, this conversation will help you build a culture that feels authentic, clear, and truly connected to the business and the mission. And it all starts now. I'm Kara, and welcome to Soul Inspiring Business. I believe that all of us possess unique gifts and talents that allow us to serve the world and our own growth in the highest possible way. Our lives are an expression of our thoughts, beliefs, and actions. And here, we will explore businesses, thought leaders, and topics designed to inspire, helping propel your own growth so you can live your best and most purposeful life. Welcome to Soul Inspiring Business. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to our listeners to the Soul Inspiring Business Podcast. Welcome, Carol Shen. I'm so happy to have you here today.
I'm thrilled to be here, Kara.
Yes, well, I was so excited for our conversation because talking about culture, especially as a lot of our listeners, many are entrepreneurs, many in the, starting to build teams. And the idea of how do you create culture is, such a big one. But I think what you're doing as the founder of Start Culture Shift is really helping people see how they can, think about culture and start to do that even if you're starting small.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. It's never too early to start.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Oh, I am as well.
Yeah. So I guess, just to take our listeners back to just your background, we heard a little bit about what you've accomplished in your career, but, what really prompted you to start this new venture and to help people really wrap their head around culture?
So my background is industrial organizational psychology. So I've always been interested in kind of the intersection between psychology and business. And, how do you build great work environments? How do you motivate people? How do you keep them engaged? And I think it's safe to say that there has been a lot of research done in recent decades that culture matters. So the good news is I don't think that's something that people debate anymore. I think leaders generally understand exactly how important it is. A lot of times that's stated on a company's website. Your CEO, your C-suite is going to talk a lot about how important work culture is. The challenge is we still have a lot of progress to make to really understand exactly what is culture. How do you deconstruct it, demystify it? How do you actually put things into place to improve it? I think that's still in progress. And what I've been doing and working on in recent years is trying to understand that. How do we deconstruct it? So any leader, whether or not you're just starting out as a founder and you've got, 1.5, 2, 3 employees, or whether you're a very large organization and maybe is already a fairly apparent culture, but it's something that you want to shift the needle on and improve, that there is a path forward to improving it. So the good news is I have cracked the code on that, or at least I think I have, and would love to share more about that with the audience today.
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting what you said, because I do think that the idea of culture, like you said, everybody's kind of bought into. Of course, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that when you were just talking, I was thinking about is that book, the Happiness Advantage. Have you ever
Mm-hmm.
read that book?
Yep.
I love his TED Talk. Is it Sean Acor? I believe is the author.
I think so. Yes.
Um, but this idea of course, the happier people are, the more productive they are,
Mhm.
and as you mentioned, I think most companies like to believe that they have some type of culture
Mhm.
or believe in the concept of it, but then sometimes the application of it gets messy, or
Yes.
we think we want to, in an ideal world, create something here,
Right.
but the practicality of it, of what people are actually experiencing, may not match that, which creates a
Yes.
disconnect, right?
Yes.
So what would you say as you're, kind of getting started? How do you think through that? Where do you start if you don't have any, if you're just starting out and you're building your team? What would be your first steps?
Yeah, so I think a great place to start sometimes is just at the basics, which is how do we define culture, right? I think how somebody looks at culture and defines it can make a huge difference as to our approach. So I'll give you an example. If
Mhm.
I'll say common misconception, a lot of people think this. If culture is very amorphous, hard to define, it's hard to put your fingers on it, hard to replicate, all those things, which I think are common assumptions about culture, then hey, then it makes it really hard to define it. It makes it hard to replicate it. It makes it hard to measure it. I've had the good fortune of just talking to a lot of experts on culture in recent years. And I remember the moment where it was a couple of years ago. Attended a conference hosted by Culturati, and there was somebody who said something very profound, which is culture is not just a set of beliefs, it's what you do.
Hmm.
And when he said that, I paused and I thought, it's what we do. Okay. Well, what drives our behaviors, right? A lot of it is the expectations of behaviors at an organization, the goals that we're set up against. And the more I thought to myself that if culture isn't just a set of beliefs, it's actions, it's what we do. I had this aha moment and I realized, wait, clarity of expected behaviors and actions, that drives culture.
Hmm.
And that's something we actually know how to do. That is something that organizations, the bigger ones, a lot of times have some kind of a performance management process in place. If you're just starting out, you may have a mission, vision, some kind of culture statement that you've jotted down on a piece of paper or it's on your website. But those are tools that we already have in place to start to articulate what kind of behaviors do we want to see at our organization. And it doesn't matter how big or small it is, that's something that can be documented. That's something you can get input from your team on. And that starts to be your North Star on what you want that culture to look like.
Hmm. And then from there, I mean, so say you say, okay, we want like a collaborative environment. We
Mhm.
want, um, people to feel really supported. So you've got these kind of ideals. Is that what you're meaning? Kind of like create these broad based, and then how do you map it into the actions?
That's a great question. So I've created this culture roadmap, and essentially it helps leaders to embed culture into strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'll talk through the three steps because what I talked about was more on step one, which is strategic clarity. And once again, whether or not you're just getting started or your organization that's been around for a while, most teams, leadership teams, are going to carve out some time to think about the strategy, right? And hopefully that's aligned to your mission, vision, values. Culture statement, I've noticed a lot of organizations still don't have, some have it. But all it is, it's once again documenting what do you want your work environment to feel like in terms of how that works. And later on, I can read an example of a culture statement if that's helpful. But let me talk through the roadmap
Oh
first. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's great.
And so it goes back to getting clarity on the North Star. That includes your strategic priorities, that includes your culture statement. And then usually the next step is drilling down into okay, that strategic plan drives the individual goals, the goals of the teams, the goals of the individuals. And hopefully, from a ideal standpoint, that information is shared throughout the organization. You get some input buy-in, and so that starts to drive down to you're transitioning from what is important at the strategic organizational level now to okay, individuals. How do individuals demonstrate that throughout the year? How do they reach their goals? What are the competencies they're held to? So when I say competencies, for those who aren't as familiar with that term, it's really just it's a set of behaviors that drive how the work gets done. So the goals are the what, and the competencies are the how. So you might have um, collaboration, growth mindset, um, strategic thinking, and critical thinking. Those are examples of competencies that you can build in. So that's step two. And that a lot of times, I think it's described as performance clarity or
Hmm.
performance expectations. But if we bring it back to the definition of culture, if culture is what you do and it's getting to clarity on those behaviors and actions, well, you're really saying that's culture clarity. And I think that is important reframe for leaders to understand that actually shifting and setting the expectation for what you want your culture to feel like is doable. It is possible. You don't necessarily have to have a full HR team. And in fact, a lot of organizations that have a chief people officer or someone who supposedly is in charge of that, they are fighting fires every day. So they may not even have the bandwidth to really address culture. But as a leader, and you don't even have to be, at the CEO level, right? You can just be leading a team. It's within your control to set those behaviors. And then the third piece, so number one was strategic clarity. Number two is performance clarity, which we're going to shift to culture clarity.
Yeah.
And number
And I love
three is,
that. Can I
yeah,
just say, like, I love that mindset shift of it's just then embedded in like your reviews,
yes,
your like how are, so then it becomes, well, if growth minded is that like we want people to think at that level or to think about growth and expansion, then that's just part of their competency. Such as like you don't necessarily think of it
right.
like that, but when you put it that way, it
Yeah.
makes total sense.
It's a reframe to help open up the path to shifting and improving your work culture, which is what
Mhm.
I found. And as I've been piloting it and sharing it with clients, I've had a really great reception to that in terms of, oh, that makes sense. That's something that I understand. This isn't, I don't need to invest millions and millions of dollars of hiring a huge consulting team to come on board and to help us figure this out. No, you have the tools within your team, and just with some simple guidance and simple roadmap, at least that is the path to getting started.
Mhm.
And then to wrap up this roadmap, the third piece, it goes back to accountability. And I use the word mutual accountability or team accountability because this can't just be on the shoulders of leaders. So I think I'm going to bring it back to a common myth, which is culture can only start at the top. It can only start if the CEO is on board.
Hmm.
I don't deny the fact that if a CEO is on board with the culture that you want to shape, that it has a much higher likelihood of success. But that isn't the only place that it can start at. And in fact, I often say to folks, culture starts with each one of us. Because if we're role modeling and demonstrating the behaviors that are important to us, so if we care about diversity of thought and perspective, if we care about inclusion, if we care about um, supporting each other, giving each other feedback, and we role models those behaviors will drive how it feels to come to work every day. Those behaviors will either bring people closer together, connect more, or unfortunately with toxic type behaviors where there's disrespect, dishonesty, lack of integrity, you'll drive people away. Either way, right?
Yeah.
So as much as yes, it should start with leadership, and it can also start with us too.
That's really it's a good way to think about it, that it can start, yeah, both both ways. Um, and I would say, what do you, if you are someone that maybe is in an environment, or maybe you're in a place where you're like, wow, our culture needs to shift. Like this
Mhm.
is we're doomed,
Yeah.
Um, so where do you start? Like, is it the same place? How do you, um, how quickly have you seen that shift?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So now we're transitioning a little bit from the roadmap and the theory to reality. So
Mhm.
here's the good news for the smaller firms. And I've done this with organizations like nonprofits as small as 5 employees. In The smaller the organization, the earlier you start, the faster you see the progress.
Hmm.
And if you have a lead, if you, and in those cases, usually everyone's on board, right? Because you have the CEO or the president, the founder, and a few folks on the team. The ability to communicate instantly and get buy-in and facilitate conversations very quickly is to your advantage. So that's the good news.
Hmm.
And it doesn't take having an external HR resource, or you don't have to wait until then to put these things into place.
Hmm.
Um, it can happen really fast. I would say you can have clarity on your culture and see those behaviors demonstrated with the right buy-in and leadership in 3 to 6 months.
Hmm.
Now, the story changes a little bit as the organization gets bigger.
Hmm.
Um, as you can imagine, huge organizations, the momentum it takes to put something like this in place, it does take a lot of effort. So in larger organizations, I would say medium organizations can still see the shift fairly rapidly. In larger organizations, you're probably more likely to find success with not just waiting, like not starting from only at the top, but you've really got to get into the different levels and get buy-in at the different levels and start at different leadership teams, groups, departments, and
Hmm.
get in that way. But it
Hmm.
does, I would say it takes a bit longer. And so what I'm trying to get the word out on the street is, if you're a small to medium sized organization, start now. It is
Hmm.
it, I personally think it is one of the best investments you can make. It doesn't take a ton. Just getting folks on board with the typical strategic planning you would have done anyways, right? You get to clarity on, you refresh mission, vision, values, culture statement, get everyone on board with your strategic plan. And then from there, you drive the behaviors you want to see through individual goals and competencies. And then the things you put into place for mutual accountability are really, it goes back to the basics of just managing and leading your people, making sure there's weekly check-ins and making sure folks are giving each other feedback. I will say feedback skills isn't something that a lot of organizations are good at or offer training. I think it's starting to become recognized as a really important business skill set. But I do think, and that I didn't mention it earlier, the ability for a manager and employee to constantly touch base on their goals
Hmm.
and have that trusted feedback loop is an ingredient to success as to whether or not you're really going to be able to sustain this culture. Or, the sad part is the ones where they say culture is important, but you don't actually see the
Hmm.
behaviors. There's a big difference between what's said and what's done. Yeah.
And I guess taking it back into just what you're saying, like sort of the nitty gritty of it. So
Mhm.
when you talk about feedback loops, like what exactly does that look like? Does it
Mm,
mean having like a weekly call? Like,
yeah.
does it, like, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. So let me start with what I've often heard people say about feedback, which is not great things. People don't love the word feedback. It doesn't have the best reputation. You probably use a little bit of a brand refresh. But I haven't found a better word than feedback. So we'll just stick with it. Right. And this is also something I've done a bit of research in and talked to experts on. At the end of the day, really feedback is just data. It's data that helps inform whether or not we need to shift our behaviors. So if we look at it that way, data on whether or not we shift our behaviors doesn't sound nearly as scary, right? It's
Hmm.
not, and it doesn't even have a positive or negative connotation. It's just, okay, data, information.
Right.
And so when I'm talking about feedback skills, at the most basic level, so let's say I have somebody who reports to me, I'm their manager.
Hmm.
I want to create an open communication channel where it goes both ways. So this is feedback both ways. The employee hopefully is open to, hey, I'm working against this goal. Um, you saw me in action at the team meeting. Do you have any constructive feedback for me or developmental feedback? Like, are there any data points where people engage or were people not paying attention? Is there something I could have done differently? And on the flip side, as the manager, being able to have that conversation with their employee on, do you feel supported? Am I giving you enough guidance? Do you need more details around timelines, deadlines? But having that dialogue, and it keeps circling back to whatever the goals have been set for that employee. And then the other part that helps make sure that there's clarity on behavioral expectations, that you go back to the list of competencies.
Hmm.
So once again, are you demonstrating asking for feedback, being able to manage conflict, respecting other, differences of opinion, things like that, that really add to a collaborative work environment where there's a strong culture.
Hmm. Yeah, and for the entrepreneur that is often, I think with small business owners, what I notice a lot is that they're pulled in so many different directions.
Mm,
Um, because and so it's like there's a lot of balls in the air a lot of the time. And so one of the things is that they're like, "Oh yeah, I need to like define my culture. I need to do that." But I have to figure out what's going on with this first, or they're pulled in so many different directions. Like,
yes.
and so what you're saying is very simple. It doesn't have to take a lot of time.
Mm-mm.
It's really just sitting down, maybe, an hour to
Mhm.
really walk through. I mean, obviously you give it some thought,
Yep,
but it doesn't have to be so overwhelming, right? And
it
are
does
there
not.
any for the AI chat GPT person, are there any prompts you found as super helpful for
Oh yeah,
people to
absolutely. Absolutely. And
start to
what I'm
map
about
this?
to share, there might be some HR consultants that get really upset at me for this but it's the reality of the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that that founder, they probably wouldn't have founded the business without already having had a mission and vision, some kind of plan in place. So let's just assume those things are done. So you have a rough sense of North Star clarity. Well,
Yeah.
then the next thing is taking that plan, doing individual goals. And this is the part where the chat GPT comes in. I happen to use Perplexity, but you can literally do the prompt is um, you can ask the prompt, what are core leadership competencies or what are core competencies that are really important in, blank industry or blank business or whatever it is. Every culture is going to be a little different. We're not trying to stamp out the same culture in every company, right?
Yeah.
So, but in terms of basic decency of what somebody looks at for a work environment, trust, respect, collaboration, feeling like you've been seen and heard, these are all behaviors that can be captured in competencies. You put that in your chat GPT, you'll have a list right there. And that's something for you to work from. Of course, you take that, you make it unique, you apply it to the team and the culture that you want.
Yeah.
But another great suggestion is if you just Google, you know, competencies or even culture statements, examples. There are so many great examples out there. Definitely no need to start from scratch. Definitely no need to reinvent the wheel. But sometimes looking at other examples of great culture statements will help you guide your team and your business towards what's important to you.
Yeah. It's interesting. I found it to be, again, a good like rough draft, right? It's
Yes.
like use it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to exactly be the right thing, but it can give you a starting point
Oh,
to
absolutely.
help you move the needle.
Accelerates efficiency tenfold. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Any other kind of tools or things that you would pull people to or offer that can help people as they map out their strategy?
Yeah.
I know you've mentioned quite a bit already, so you
Yeah.
might.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the things I share in terms of tools and resources are things you can find anywhere on the internet. As a backup, you can always go to my website, startcultureshift.com. So I have a resources page. Um,
Awesome.
but these are, I would say, tactics. This is where it's translating strategy into operations and how you actually do it, which I think a lot of times is missing. The guidance out there is either very strategic or very tactical. So if we take that, okay, we're trying the goal here, bring it back to goal, embed culture in a strategy. Okay, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis for managers and founders? Well, make sure your goals are either fast or smart. So that's another
Mm.
resource or tool. Those acronyms help make sure that there's clarity in performance expectations. So FAST stands for frequently discussed, ambitious, specific, transparent. Um, if anyone's curious about where that came from, there's a father-son team, Donald and Charlie Sull out of MIT. They've done some fantastic research on culture, and they also, I think they came up with that framework.
Hmm.
SMART is the other acronym, which can be used as well. Pretty common, but it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So that's another resource. It just goes back to being clear and specific about goal expectations. And then the last
Mhm.
one I'll leave with, which might be the most important one, especially in a hybrid environment where a lot of managers and their teams are sitting in different places, is just making sure that the time with your direct reports is held sacred, that
Mm.
connection, because keeping those one-on-ones on the books, and I will say quality trumps quantity, right? So it's not necessarily, oh, I need to talk to each direct report an hour each week. It's more about during that time, are your folks feeling like they're supported? Do they have clarity? Do they have psychological safety to share what's
Mm.
going on in their lives? That connection is the foundation for trust. And when you've got trust, then you've got improved work culture, you've got happier employees, and then, it just keeps it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's, I think, what companies strive for, but really struggle with achieving, which is building that environment where people feel great and connected and
Mm.
are happy to stay. Because the talent war is no joke. There is definitely it's hard for companies to keep really good talent, and that's definitely one way to do it, is to create a work environment like that.
Mm. And frequency wise, I know you mentioned really quality over, time spent, but is there an ideal setup that you found, especially with a lot of virtual companies, um, and, people working from home,
Yeah,
or, what is that ideal
yeah.
if you want to put something in place?
I think it might be helpful to think about it from kind of like the bare minimum. So I would say bare minimum is once every other week with your direct reports. Bare
Mm.
minimum. Weekly would be ideal, but there's a certain reality that some people have just a ton of direct reports, have to travel a ton. And these days there's so many tools like Slack, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sit down hour, but if there's here's the good news. Once you build a very trusting relationship, you could probably accomplish in 15 minutes what would normally take an hour, because you can just get to the point, because you have a good relationship and you can hit on, oh, wait, okay, these are the 3 high priority things. Hope all is well done, right? Because you know that you have a manager or you have an employee where you can flex to each other's insane work schedules. But it takes effort and time to build that relationship. But back to ideally weekly, but every other week at a minimum. And if
Mhm.
it's been a month since you last spoke to your direct report, um, it doesn't matter how high of a performer they are. They're over time that will hurt. That will hurt the relationship. So I would caution against that.
Mm. And then in that call, that weekly check-in,
Mhm.
it's really infusing not only where are they on their goals, but
Yes.
then also kind of asking for feedback. What more do you need? How can I
Yes.
be more helpful to you? That
Yeah.
kind of feedback loop infused with where they're headed can
Exactly.
again kind of lead to that trust that you're trying to build.
Yeah. And if the organization has a competencies, and like we said, you can, you could do this in an hour if you really wanted to, right? You have the list of behaviors that you really expect people to demonstrate in terms of how they do their work. That's also a great checkpoint, especially for those who are fairly self-aware. It's like, for example, let's say I'm working on improving something about myself, and it might be project management skills, it might be the ability to navigate change. That competency roadmap will help be kind of anchor, okay, what are the specific skill sets that I need to work on that I can
Mm.
continue to improve? And that'll help in my career as I continue to grow and develop in my role.
Love that. Yeah. Well, and I'm curious too, um, just because I know that you have recently, and you talked about it in the beginning, how you made this shift because you saw this need in the marketplace.
Hmm.
Um, but and this show is about creating a soul aligned
Yes.
business, a soul inspiring business where you can really show up feeling like you're making a difference in the world. But coming from your corporate background and then taking that leap into entrepreneurship, I'm just curious, how was that for you? What caused you to really make the leap?
Right. So I made the leaps, let's say, I think it's been 7 years now. And for me, I think it was a very classic case of I was working full time. I had a great job at a company called CEB. They've been since then they've been bought out by Gartner, but I had a full time role as director of learning and development, and it was a big job. At the time, I had my second child, so my kids were really young, and I decided to take some time off because I was exhausted. I was burned
Mm,
out. Did the company was very supportive of me going part time, but it's just still a lot to juggle. So it was during that break that I was fortunate where I had time to reflect and think about what I really wanted to do. Um, at the time, it was really just more of a when I decided that I did want to go back to work, I thought, let me see if I can go out on my own. And it was basically a pilot. I guess you could
mm,
say, like I've reached out to a few friends and some great relationships, so brought in a few clients, um, and it was through that process of taking the risk, and it was a little scary, but seeing each client that I had led to something else, led to something else. Over time, I started realizing I think this will actually work, and I'm so much more fulfilled. And just as a working mom, I had so much more flexibility. I've been primary parent for most of our marriage because my husband works at a hospital. He has very little flexibility. So, all these things.
yeah.
And it's been a true blessing, and I'm so grateful I took that leap.
Yeah.
And it continues to just keep on giving. So it's a path
Yeah.
that I'm
I
so
love
happy that I
that.
took. Yeah.
Well, and I think that entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but I think that, sometimes it's like when you feel the nudge, and we talk a lot about on the show too, manifesting money, but also just showing up every day to make a difference in the people that you can impact,
Hmm.
and how that's sort of the mission,
Yeah.
I think, especially of a soul inspiring business, because then the clients and the money, they just kind of naturally flow
Yes.
when you're in your flow with
Yeah.
how you can create really big impact for others.
Yeah. I
And
have
yeah,
heard that being in the flow, and I've learned that like there's like flow research out there and the science behind it. And you're so right, where, yes, at times I'll have to be honest, I worried about, oh, am I going to bring in another client from an income standpoint? But I kept going back to if I'm doing what I love, people can tell that I'm doing what I love, and I'm more impactful and they get better results. And that cycle keeps growing. And now it's starting. I feel like I'm at a phase in my business where I'm starting to see ripple effects in the pond, and really excited. And back to, you know, entrepreneurship isn't necessarily for everyone. It's true. It's like, we have to get a sense of what works well for us. I have friends that have tried it. It wasn't great for them, and they've gone on to do great things in a more traditional role, which is fantastic. For me, I like new and different all the time. And I think
yeah,
that's where being an entrepreneur is a good fit for me, where I actually feel very stifled when I have to rinse and repeat. But when I get to take an idea and try it with different clients and different industries and different roles, um, that gets me out of bed each day.
love that. Well, and for anybody listening too that is like, wow, I want to learn more. Who are kind of the ideal people you're helping right now in terms of businesses? Like, do you have sort of a typical client that you're attracting? So if anybody is listening and thinks, huh, actually, I know somebody that would be good for that, or for good to connect with Carol. And, what would that be? Who would that be to?
Yeah,
Who would that
absolutely.
person to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, I think, roughly there's three profiles of clients that I'm working with. I'll start off with maybe the folks that tend to listen to your podcast, which by the way, thank you for doing this, because I think you are truly inspirational and absolutely soul inspiring, Kara.
Oh, thank you.
So definitely smaller businesses. I am advising startups and founders of startups. I know from, revenue is always a challenge at this phase. But if it's a group where it's mission aligned, meaning I really have bought into the mission, I want to help them be successful, I am taking clients on like those. Another one is also nonprofits. And that's, once again, I'm not, I'm motivated by the potential impact. And so if I'm aligned with a mission, associations have been great for me as well. And then the third is private markets. So that's kind of a whole big industry where I feel like, and when I say private markets, it might be private equity, private credit, real assets, real estate, alternative markets, essentially. The reality is they don't have the best reputation for having great work cultures in that world. And I'm trying to make it better because I think that they have enormous impact on the economy, global economy, because these are the guys that invest money into all different kinds of companies across all different industries. So I advise both GPs, the general partners on the private equity side, as well as limited partners. Those are the folks that sit on top of the pension funds. So
Wow.
if anyone has any connections to those, I'm more than happy to talk. But I'm not at a point where I'm saying no necessarily to any. I'm learning a lot about different industries, had some tech clients and so forth. So I think there's just huge appetite and huge opportunity for shifting work culture.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, as we started even in the beginning and saying that, when you have a culture that people are happier, they're more productive. So it's within everybody's best interest,
Mm-hmm.
especially at the top, the leadership,
Yeah.
to really take it very seriously so that you can retain good talent. And also it's just a better way of doing work, right?
Yeah.
When people are showing up happier and more productive. And then, depending on your industry, the client or the end user can feel that too, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And then I'll just to continue, I just had a thought. I'm realizing, there's a lot of organizations out there who I think at some point do want to work on their culture, but they're not quite there yet. So in terms of a bite-sized piece of what I do and the work and the services that I offer, I facilitate leadership offsites, strategy offsites, team offsites, sales kickoffs. I teach a lot of courses. I have a heavy faculty teaching, instructional design background. So for anyone who is interested in kind of improving the skill sets that you need for a company to be successful, communication skills, collaboration skills, emotional intelligence, feedback, so forth, I'm also a great person and a resource to call.
Love that. Well, we'll make sure to link your info and all of everything that people would need to know to get in touch with you in the show notes. What's your most preferred way for people to reach out?
Email would be great. So if you go to my website, you'll see, get in touch with me, and then I'll send it right to my email address.
Okay. And the website, if you can remind everybody your website.
Yeah. It's startcultureshift.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll link that in the show notes as well. And it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. And I agree that if we can just improve culture, a lot of things improve in the
Yes.
business. So it's such a great way to start. And I so appreciate all that you shared. So thank you so
Oh, thank you
much.
so much. I had so much fun being here. Thank you for having me.
Loved being here with you today and would love to connect with you more over on Instagram. My handle is linked to the show notes, or you can just type in @Chaffin Donofrio. And I have something special for you as a free gift, my dynamic life journal. This special book has the power to really help you live a soul-inspired life. Go to freegiftfromkara.com. Easy to remember, freegiftfromkara.com. Until next time, beautiful people, sending all my love.